Hi everybody and welcome back to the discussion. My name is Mpoka Shwonga and I work for the British High Commission in Namibia. Thanks so much for being here as we talk about one of the most pertinent issues in the world today, and that is climate change and specifically COP26 in the context of climate finance. And we're going to get to a lot more detail about what that is in a moment with some two really special guests. As a bit of a recap, COP26 is a major conference coming at the end of this year in the UK, and it's going to bring together world leaders from the very top, talking about presidential level, head of private companies, as well as going to people on the ground, people in the NGO space, people in the youth space, to make sure that we have representation all the way up. And the challenge to come to a consensus about what is the best way for us to deal with the challenges of climate change. Now, of course, with any solution, you need funding. You need a way to finance what's going to happen. And today we're here to talk to two really special guests, Namibians who are passionate about this country, passionate about climate finance, and have the expertise to break it down in a way that you can understand and I can understand. So, to start, firstly, we're with Louise Brown, who's from Triple Capital. Thank you very much for joining us, Louise.
Thank you for having me.
And then we're also here with Aina-Maria Iteta. I make sure I get your surname right, who's from the EIF. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
How are you guys doing today?
I'm great, thanks.
Great.
Great. So these are the two experts, everybody. Really, I'm just here to facilitate this discussion, but the knowledge is coming just from the two of them, and it's a pleasure to have you two here. So let's start from the very basics, right? So for those who have no idea what climate finance is, let's start with a definition. Louise, maybe you can help us out with that. How would you describe what climate finance is to the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So climate finance is finance, so funding and investments that are channeled specifically for activities that address climate change.
Yeah.
And of course, climate change activities come in two main forms. Mm-hmm. So one is mitigation activities.
Yes.
So those are activities that reduce the greenhouse gases that cause climate change.
Yeah.
So an example of that would be renewable energy projects such as solar or wind.
Yeah.
So what those do is they displace investments in fossil fuels, fossil fuel generated energy, which emits carbon dioxide, which contributes to global warming. So that's an example of a mitigation activity. The other main set of activities is adaptation activities, and those help communities, ecosystems, and economies to respond to climate change that's already happening.
Yes.
So for example, climate resilient agriculture, such as drought-resistant crops or water-wise irrigation systems, are examples of adaptation because they help farming communities to continue to farm in a world that's hotter or drier or where rainfall is more erratic. Yeah. So finance for any of those types of activities is called climate finance.
Yeah. That was really well broken down, and I wish I could have that same sense of one idea to the other, so it's a pleasure that you're being here. Aina, do you want to add anything to that definition at this stage?
Well, Mpo, I think she really covered it deeply, that is scientifically and technically, definitely, and that's the convenient for the language of climate change. Yes. Really, if I may add to that, is that this is a special vehicle, and definitely is not our usual normal financing for social development and other developmental aspects that we fund. So that's why we need really to pay much attention and advocate, create awareness so that people understand the difference between climate financing and ordinary financing that we deal with.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. And I guess, a lot of the examples that both of you two mentioned speak a lot to what's happening in this country in the sense of drought. We have a huge agricultural sector, especially those that, live of agriculture from a subsistence level, so not necessarily for commercial gain. And then, of course, water. I mean, we are one of the driest countries in Southern Africa. So I suppose, having finance that doesn't just look at returns, but looks at the value of that finance to the communities and to the natural ecosystem makes a really big difference. And it expands what we're thinking about, how we're taking things forward. So in that sense, maybe we can dive a bit deeper into that. And in that sense, Aina, we can come to you and sort of your work with the EIF. In terms of, climate finance in the context of Namibia, why is it so important? What's the real value for Namibians here in country?
Well, of course, EIF is a state-owned entity, and the ministry, of course, we might be having two-line ministry. We, of course, from a subject matter point of view, our line ministry is Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism. But of late, we were moved to the Ministry of Finance because of the finance aspect in our mandate. Yeah. However, the relationship with the Ministry of Environment continues to be very strong. In this context, EIF is currently occupying, I would probably say, a special place when it comes to climate financing.
Yeah.
And we are trying by all means to deal with issues of resource mobilization, both nationally and internationally.
Great.
And at this juncture, I would be profoundly indicate that we have raised more than 3 billion Namibian dollars to date in terms of supporting climate change issues.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And congratulations. That really is quite something. I don't know if, Louise, you want to jump on any of that before we move to the next question.
Well, in terms of your question on why climate finance is important to Namibia,
yes,
what I would say is, well, firstly, what you alluded to, that climate change has very real consequences for Namibian communities, and we've seen the prolonged drought. We've seen the very heavy rains and flash flooding that's destroyed infrastructure. So those have very real consequences for people's lives and also for the economy. So that's one reason. But in addition to that, I would add that Namibia is a signatory of the Paris Agreement.
Yes.
That is, of course, the global agreement under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, but through which all countries commit to addressing climate change. So as a signatory of that agreement, Namibia has a commitment to address climate change, both from the mitigation side, so reducing its greenhouse gas emissions, and also from the adaptation side, so helping communities and the economy broadly to be more resilient to those impacts that are going to happen anyway. And those activities need to be funded. And the scale of the funding required is much, much greater, orders of magnitude greater than what Namibia can fund through its national budget. So for that reason, we need to mobilize funding, both from developed country donors, but also from the private sector. So we really need to see that scale up of finance if we're going to be able to achieve our goals as a country and, globally, the goals under the Paris Agreement.
Right. And I guess this also links to sort of the UN as a big partner in all of this and meeting all the SDGs. And climate finance, it really seems to cut across all of the SDGs to sort of bring all the different kind of stakeholders into the picture. But then I guess one has to wonder, with such a noble goal, responding to such a huge problem, there still are challenges in the climate finance space, right? Like money it's not always easy to get a sense of consensus around what's happening and to actually get the money to the people themselves. And I guess in that sense, it'd be really interesting to understand sort of from both of you, maybe from like a global and a local perspective, what are the challenges that come with having climate finance? Because I think from the viewer's perspective, it sounds like a no-brainer, right? Like we know what the challenge is, the money is needed, why isn't it flowing? So maybe Louise, we can start with you, sort of, what are those kind of challenges?
Yeah. I would say that there are three major challenges. The first is actually getting the scale of funding needed. And that's a challenge both globally and for Namibia. So globally, there is an estimated roughly $3 trillion per year in investment needed for climate change mitigation. And in addition to that, an additional approximately 500 billion needed for adaptation. So those are colossal sums.
Yeah, they're huge numbers.
The amount of funding that's actually flowing currently for climate change is in the order of about 500 billion. So it's many orders of magnitude less than what is needed. That's per year, by the way, 500 billion per year. So it's a lot of money, but it's not enough. So that's the biggest challenge. And then that brings us to what I see as the second major challenge, which is we know that although the public sector needs to step up and put more funding into climate change, the scale of the challenge is such that the public sector alone won't be able to raise that level of funding. So we really need to get more private sector involvement. Now, currently, not just the private sector, but globally, there's about $1 trillion per year going into the fossil fuel sector, and that's the sector that causes climate change. So we really need to see that funding shifting away from fossil fuels and towards clean technologies and clean alternatives. So that scaling up that private sector finance is really critical. And then the third area where I see a big challenge is in getting the finance to where it's really needed. And this is specifically a problem for adaptation. So adaptation is very local. The vulnerability to climate change is very locally specific. So for example, a farming community in the Kunene region, for example, faces very different risks than another farming community in Zambezi, just as an example. So we really need to see funding flowing down to that local level so that empowered communities can use the funding in a way that's locally relevant.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, Aina, this can sort of, your experience here in country can also add a lot of value to the discussion, because I suppose the challenge is, and sometimes this is it's a challenge that I think a lot of development partners have had in different spheres, which is, we sit in offices with really smart people, really clever ideas for solutions about communities that are outside of our offices, right? Like, sometimes you just have to go to the community. And I very strongly believe, and Louise kind of hinted at it, no one knows the challenges of their community better than the people that live there. And you have completely different quality conversations when you go and discuss with them. So I guess, do you want to add a bit more in terms of the challenges maybe you have seen in the green finance space here in country, and that sort of echo what Louise has been chatting about?
Yes, Paul, I would want to zoom in to a local situation. And I will look at this from two different dimensions.
Please, go ahead.
Following what you have just said now, having people designing probably project proposal for communities who are living in rural areas, that can be true. And on the other side, one can have a different opinion. So we probably being seated here in Windhoek, but we are coming from rural areas. And at time we pretend to forget where we are coming from. I would refuse to believe that I do not understand the circumstances of climate challenges of people from my village of Onamlunga, where I'm coming from. So I would refuse to do so, because I grew up in that village. I have seen how people are going through the struggle of less reduced productivity and the likes, and I'm still supporting them to deal with issues of household food security, for that matter. So now to sit here probably, but the question we should ask as well, as much as we are reporting funds that we are actually resourcing elsewhere, it could be both by our budget allocation from the state, it could be now internationally. I think we have been having a lot of funds that are coming from the international donors. So we need also to evaluate ourselves. Where are the money going? There is no probably significant impact, but yet as EIF being involved, especially our mandate is really focusing on grant implementation. So you look back, introspect, and you would want to see significant impacts that are so sustainable. But at times it becomes so difficult. Why? Because most of the funds that we attract are quite micro funding. And even if we would count this number of people have benefited, what is exactly the sustainable development that you have brought towards those people? Let's talk about Kunene. There has been a number of funds going to Kunene because of the status of poverty in Kunene. We can all not deny and run away from that. But if you go to Kunene today, you look at the situation, you ask and reevaluate yourself, where is the impact of the fund that we have been pumping in that particular region? Maybe that is a discussion for another day, and I call upon mostly even civil societies to conduct certain surveys to understand where are the stumbling blocks, why are we not making significant impact that we want to achieve within the livelihood of our people deep down in the rural areas.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And that's a really important example for colleagues to realize and for the viewers to realize about what's happening here in country and in the Kunene space. Sort of as we come to the end of this discussion, it's been something with a lot of information about what's happening in present, and you've given a really good historical sense of what has been the developments in climate finance. If we want to look forward to the future, COP26 and beyond, I'd really love to get both of your takes on where do you see the future of climate finance going. And I think we can end with those notes, because I think I see both of you as kind of optimists without putting any too much pressure. It'd be great to hear those views about where you think things are going. Maybe we can start with you, Louise, and end with you, Aina.
So in terms of COP26, one of the big issues that's on the agenda is around market mechanisms for climate change. So what I hope to see from that, and market mechanisms are complex, so I don't think we can go into it in this discussion. Maybe that's a subject for another discussion. But essentially what market mechanisms have the potential to do is to really attract and incentivize industry to shift towards clean technology and to invest in clean technologies
Yeah.
on a massive scale.
Yes.
So I hope to see an ambitious outcome from COP26 on carbon markets.
Yes.
And there's also a discussion on the table around market mechanisms for adaptation,
Yeah.
which is very new and innovative. So I hope to see something exciting coming out of that space. In terms of climate finance more broadly, I think it's a really exciting space.
Yeah.
And I think that what we're seeing now is that it's becoming much more mainstream.
Yes.
So, for example, recently a group of 150 plus of the world's biggest institutional investors set up a platform to push big corporates to integrate climate change risk into their operations.
Yeah.
So we're really seeing that movement from stakeholders across the board. It's no longer just a thing of like environment gurus.
Yes.
So I think that's really exciting, and I would really like to see that shift coming to Namibia. At the moment, I think our financial sector, private sector, not really thinking that much about climate change risks and opportunities.
Yeah.
Although it is starting to be on their radar, and that's very promising. So I hope to really see that take off in the next 5 years or so. But in order for it to take off, what we need is government policy that creates the right enabling environment for investment in climate change. So I really hope to see the kind of policies, regulations, incentives, and also the strategic use of public funds
Yes.
that would allow the private sector to really come in and invest at scale in Namibia. And I'd also like to see more funding flowing to the local level, and I think the work that EIF is doing in that space is really innovative. EIF, and Aina can speak more to this, but EIF is the first, or one of the first institutions in Africa to be accredited to the Green Climate Fund, and it's mobilized a lot of funding through that. And they're also using innovative grant award mechanisms to get that funding down to communities.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of innovation happening in that space. And I really think that Namibia has the potential to be a leader on climate finance. We're already showing that leadership. We've got a great track record on sustainable development.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I would really like to see us build on that
Yeah.
and really see Namibia as a leading voice for Africa and for developing countries on the world stage
Yeah.
on climate finance.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. And it sounds, Aina, like you have quite a fan here, myself included. Do you want to add some closing words for us on where you see this future going?
Yes, the future is climate change.
Yeah.
We can't run away from that. If we don't address issues of climate change is moving, and it's living on us if we are not going to act to deal with it. Of course, EIF will continue to deal with issues and focus mainly on issues of resource mobilization.
Yeah.
That's our strategy to ensure that Namibia continue to fight issues of climate change.
Yes.
Of course, we are led by a man who he lives on climate financing.
Yeah.
It is because of his effort, Mr. Ribanda, really, we have managed to get all those money in this country. And the ambition is quite high, and we are going to make sure that we will increase especially our accreditation category to the Green Climate Fund.
Yes.
That is the current biggest global fund in the world when it comes to climate change. And for the globe, I just hope that the two mechanisms that have been put there by the convention, that is the GEF and the GCF, will continue to provide climate financing so that communities that are really suffering and the developing countries are really suffering on the effect of climate change can have meaningful impact and have solutions to deal with issues of climate change. And for us, adaptation is an issue. We understand we have not contributed to greenhouse gases, but we need to sustain our livelihood that has been destroyed by the impact of greenhouse gases. So we look forward and we are pushing as a country.
Thank you so much. And honestly, one thing I feel sort of in our little table is the passion that you have. And I suppose as a Namibian, as someone who works for the UK, thank you very much for your expertise and your consistent push to bring the benefits of climate finance to Namibia. Colleagues and all viewers here, these are the experts that you need to chat to. And I think in the Namibian context, we have the expertise. It really is just about being more precise and collaborating more effectively about making sustainable change. If you'd like to find out more from the EIF side, their website is eif.org.na. And of course, Louise has started her own company, triplecapital.com.na. You can find out more at their website. I think they'd be open to chatting to the public as they are now.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being with us. Colleagues, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's a Friday and there's a long weekend the next weekend, but we'll get there. Thank you so much, and thanks of course to Tripefire Studios. And everyone, take care, be safe, and please stay tuned. Ciao.